I, Lelouch v. Britannia, command you. Now all of you.
Subscribe now.
In an age where audiences have now become accustomed to lackluster endings from genre storytelling, in an era where dissatisfactory conclusions are no longer a shocker,
Ray Skywalker.
I'd like to take you away from Hollywood for a second. How about I instead take you down the path of anime? Why don't we enter the time machine and travel back in time to the 2000s, when Code Geass was on TV? In hindsight, Lelouch of the Rebellion did something that by today's standards feels impossible. It brought its own story to a satisfying end.
What?
Yeah, I know, right? In this day and age, that's hard to imagine. But as much as I love the original Code Geass ending, the reality is, in the real world, it would never work. The massive impact that would result from the geopolitical shift we see take place in the series' last few episodes to the global economy, the global financial system, and the security system would be quite disastrous. I know, I don't mean to ruin the glorious ending to Lelouch of the Rebellion. But before we take a practical look at the real-world implications of the anime series conclusion, why don't you take the time to like and subscribe? Okay, this is the Geass Network, the place where we discuss, theorize, and cover all things Code Geass. If you're a Code Geass fan, then this is the place to be. But before I further explain why the Zero Requiem isn't realistic whatsoever, first we have to go over the events that lead to the series ending. After the death of the Holy Britannian Empire's leader, Charles Z. Britannia, his son, Lelouch v. Britannia, succeeds his father and ascends the throne.
Acknowledge me as Emperor! Lelouch!
All hail Emperor Lelouch!
However, Emperor Lulu has no interests in keeping it business as usual. Oh no, not with this new emperor. He then proceeds to carefully dismantle Britannia. The emperor ordered the destruction of the ancient imperial mausoleum, abolishes the aristocracy, and scatters the various factions of plutocrats within the country's power structure. He does this in just a matter of days. But you see, this allows Lelouch to be the sole center of power within Britannia, making him the enemy of the world. In response to all this chaos, the world unites together under the banner of the UFN, United Federations of Nations. After the assassination of Lelouch, this allows for more unity and cooperation between the various states, bringing forth the Zero Requiem. Britannia's world order is dismantled, and an era of uninterrupted peace is ushered in. Okay, first let's look at why the Zero Requiem would never work in the real world. The whole assumption that bringing an end to the Britannian world order would bring everlasting peace is naive at best. The removal of Britannia as Japan's oppressors would only leave a vacuum. Yes, there is the UFN, but every nation would still need its own domestic governance framework. And it doesn't take a genius to know that power vacuums generally lead to conflicts. Plus, the so-called Zero Requiem doesn't take into account the various culture and history of all the regions Britannia subjugated. That can also lead to mistrust as well as conflict. However, I can probably guess what some of you are thinking. Isn't this the reason why Lelouch chose to make himself the enemy of the world? To force the world to put aside its differences and come together in a dialogue of peace?
And the hatred of the whole world is now focused directly upon me. And now the only thing that remains is to get rid of me and finally break the cycle of hatred. With this, the world will gather not for an exchange of force, but for an exchange of open dialogue around one table.
The world coming together in the name of fighting a common enemy is a good strategy for peace in the short term. But once the threat is in the rearview mirror, however, the historical and cultural difference could sink the world back into conflict. Understand, I'm oversimplifying this conversation. To properly unpack the various histories, cultures, and how they play into geopolitics in the different regions of the world. Now let's move on to another obstacle that would prevent a zero Requiem type situation from happening. And this point is probably the most easiest to explain.
The military-industrial complex.
Once again, before I wade into this topic in particular, I'm going to simplify it. Perhaps you could even say dumb it down, for a lack of a better term. War, while terrible, also happens to be big business. I'm sure anyone can at least understand that simple concept.
It's all about the money.
War is very profitable, a fact every empire has known. However, the party that benefits the most from forever wars are what are commonly referred to as the military-industrial complex. These are basically the weapons manufacturers. The military-industrial complex have amassed enormous wealth as well as political influence. They have, of course, funded politicians and parties for decades, lobbying governments to pursue policies that would create conflict and war. Weapons manufacturers make money from defense contracts, selling missiles, tanks, fighter jets, and drones, generating billions. Now, to bring it back to the Code Geass universe, the military-industrial complex would most likely be behind the nightmare frames. The Zero Requiem would pose a threat to the defense contractors. After all, their business model requires constant war for them to make money. There is no reality where they would simply just sit back and allow the Zero Requiem to happen. Now, to be fair, the Code Geass franchise did address this in their own way in the Lelouch of the Resurrection film. Zilkstan, the fictional Middle Eastern nation the movie is set in, is presented as a country that more or less depends on military conflict to generate wealth for their nation.
Comprised of 90% desert with precious few resources to go around, Zilkstan's chief export is entirely represented by their fighting force and military technology.
What's funny about the clip I just showed is that it implies that a Middle Eastern nation is extremely light on natural resources and has to rely on its military and technology for almost the entirety of their GDP. I feel like the war in Iran, as well as the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, has demonstrated just how dependent the world is on the Middle East and its natural resources. When it comes to being light on natural resources and having to rely on violence and colonization, only one region in the world fits that description, the so-called Western powers. Just look at Britannia, a Western nation. It invaded Japan for its natural wealth, the saccharide energy resource. I know that in the anime series, they try to allude to the idea that Britannia is colonizing all these regions around the world to access ancient Geass ruins. However, in real life, that would be ridiculous. Europe didn't colonize and destroy Africa just to gain access to the pyramids. No. It was because of the natural resources which funded their so-called industrial revolution. Speaking of natural resources, how about we move on to another obstacle that would impede the Zero Requiem in a real-life situation?
Access to cheap energy.
Earlier, I did mention saccharide energy resource, which is used to power nightmare frames. And Japan has a lot of saccharide. Hence, subjugating Japan and making it a dominion of the empire is extremely important, considering how vital nightmares are to Britannia's power. Control over Area 11 gives Britannia access to cheaper energy. They don't have to negotiate with what would be Japan's government on trade agreements or worry about trade deficits. And I'm sure Britannia's overall industrial base also benefits from the cheap access to saccharide. But don't fool yourself. Britannia's domestic economy would likely not be the only one that would benefit from the saccharide. The other colonies under the empire's rule would also be among the beneficiaries. Factories, for example, powered by that saccharide, would create jobs in many countries. These jobs would be casualties if Japan gained independence and exercised control over their own resource. If Britannia is an alternate version of the United States, then reason dictates that it would command the same amount of control and dominance over the global economic infrastructure, meaning no body of nations could easily undermine Britannia's power without a massive domino effect across the entire world. Global trade would be turned upside down. Private sector investments across the planet would be in jeopardy. In conclusion, I love Lelouch of the Rebellion, and its ending is absolutely perfect. It works wonderfully within the context of a science fiction anime. However, Realistically, the Zero Requiem just wouldn't work out. But thankfully, the original Code Geass ending isn't going anywhere. We can re-watch it over and over again to our heart's content. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Till next time, bye.
I, Lelouch v. Britannia, command you. Now all of you.
Subscribe now.